Good morning, Huskies. This is our first read along or listen to or read with Mrs. Pimentel for the year. Our title is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is the first book in the series. You can read this book independently if you'd like on Destiny Discover, also on Sora. Both of those applications are available through your Clever account, so all you have to do is log in through Clever, find the applications, and open them up. You'll search in for the title, and it'll pop right up, and you select Borrow. And then you can read this lovely title. I also have many copies of this title in the North Mountain Library. And if you would like to check out the physical book like I have here, you can simply give me an email and let me know that you'd like to pick it up, and I can go ahead and check it out for you and leave it for you at the front desk. So let's go ahead and get started reading The Hunger Games. I'm going to read about 5 chapters a day. Part 1, The Tributes. When I wake up, the other side of my bed is cold. My fingers stretch out, seeking Prim's warmth, but finding only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. She must have had bad dreams and climbed in with our mother. Of course she did. This is the day of the reaping. I prop myself up on one elbow. There's enough light in the bedroom to see them. My little sister Prim curled up on her side, cocooned in my mother's body, their cheeks pressed together. In sleep, my mother looks younger, still worn, but not so beaten down. Prim's face is as fresh as a raindrop, as lovely as the primrose for which she was named. My mother was very beautiful once, too, or so they tell me. Sitting at Prim's knees, guarding her, is the world's ugliest cat. Mashed-in nose, half of one ear missing, eyes the color of rotting squash. Prim named him Buttercup, insisting that his muddy yellow coat matched the bright flower. He hates me, or at least distrusts me. Even though it was years ago, I think he still remembers how I tried to drown him in a bucket when Prim brought him home. Scrawny kitten, belly swollen with worms, crawling with fleas. The last thing I needed was another mouth to feed. But Prim begged so hard, cried even. I had to let him stay. It turned out okay. My mother got rid of the vermin, and he's a born mouser. Even catches the occasional rat. Sometimes when I clean a kill, I feed Buttercup the entrails. He has stopped hissing at me. Entrails? No hissing. This is the closest we will ever come to love. I swing my legs off the bed and slide into my hunting boots, supple leather that has molded to my feet. I pull on trousers, a shirt, tuck my long dark braid up into a cap, and grab my forage bag. On the table, under a wooden bowl to protect it from hungry rats and cats alike, sits a perfect little goat cheese wrapped in basil leaves, Prim's gift to me on reaping day. I put the cheese carefully in my pocket as I slip outside. Our part of District 12, nicknamed the Seam, is usually crawling with coal miners heading out to the morning shift at this hour. Men and women with hunched shoulders, swollen knuckles, many who have long since stopped trying to scrub the coal dust out of their broken nails, the lines of their sunken faces. But today the black cinder streets are empty. Shutters on the squat gray houses are closed. The reaping isn't until 2. May as well sleep in if you can. Our house is almost at the edge of the seam. I only have to pass a few gates to reach the scruffy field called the meadow. Separating the meadow from the woods, in fact, enclosing all of District 12, is a high chain link fence topped with barbed wire loops. In theory, it's supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day as a deterrent to the predators that live in the woods. Packs of wild dogs, lone cougars, bears that used to threaten our streets. But since we're lucky to get 2 or 3 hours of electricity in the evenings, it's usually safe to touch. Even so, I always take a moment to listen carefully for the hum that means the fence is alive. Right now, it's silent as a stone, concealed by a clump of bushes. I flatten out on my belly and slide under a 2-foot stretch that's been loose for years. There are several other weak spots in the fence, but this one is so close to home, I almost always enter the woods here. As soon as I'm in the trees, I retrieve a bow and a sheath of arrows from a hollow log. Electrified or not, the fence has been successful at keeping the flesh eaters out of District 12. Inside the woods, they roam freely, and there are added concerns like venomous snakes, rabid animals, and no real paths to follow. But there's also food if you know how to find it. My father knew, and he taught me some before he was blown to bits in a mine explosion. There was nothing even to bury. I was 11 then. 5 years later, I still wake up screaming for him to run. Even though trespassing in the woods is illegal and poaching carries the severest of penalties, more people would risk it if they had weapons. But most are not bold enough to venture out with just a knife. My bow is a rarity, crafted by my father, along with a few others that I keep well hidden in the woods, carefully wrapped in waterproof covers. My father could have made money selling them, but if the officials found out, he would have been publicly executed for inciting a rebellion. Most of the peacekeepers turn a blind eye to the few of us who hunt because they're as hungry for fresh meat as anybody is. In fact, they're among our best customers. But the idea that someone might be arming the seam would never have been allowed. Excuse me. In the fall, a few brave souls sneak into the woods to harvest apples, but always in sight of the meadow, always close enough to run back to the safety of District 12 if trouble arises. District 12, well, you can starve to death in safety, I mutter. Then I glance quickly over my shoulder. Even here, even in the middle of nowhere, you worry someone might overhear you. When I was younger, I scared my mother to death. The things I would blurt out about District 12, about the people who rule our country. Panem, from the far-off cry city called the capital. Eventually I understood this would only lead us to more trouble, so I learned to hold my tongue and to turn my features into an indifferent mask so that no one could even read my thoughts. Do my work quietly in school, make only polite small talk in the public market, discuss little more than trades in the hob, which is the black market where I make most of my money. Even at home, where I am less pleasant, I avoid discussing tricky topics like the reaping or food shortages or the Hunger Games. Prim might begin to repeat my words, and then where would we be? In the woods waits the only person with whom I can be myself, Gail. I can feel the muscles in my face relaxing, my pace quickening as I climb the hills to our place, a rock overlooking a valley. A thicket of berry bushes protects it from unwanted eyes. The sight of him waiting there brings on a smile. Gail says I never smile except in the woods. Hey, Catnip, says Gail. My real name is Katniss, but when I first told him, I had barely whispered it, so he thought I'd said catnip. Then when this crazy lynx started following me around the woods, looking for handouts, it became his official nickname for me. I finally had to kill the lynx because he scared off game. I almost regretted it because he wasn't bad company, but I got a decent price for his pelt. Look what I shot, Gail holds up a loaf of bread with an arrow stuck in it, and I laughed. It's real bakery bread, not the flat, dense loaves we make from our grain rations. I take it in my hands, pull out the arrow, and hold the puncture in the crust to my nose, inhaling the fragrance that makes my mouth flood with saliva. Fine bread like this is for special occasions. Still warm, I say. He must have been at the bakery at the crack of dawn to trade for it. What did it cost you? Just a squirrel. Think the old man was feeling sentimental this morning, says Gail. Even wished me luck. Well, we'll feel a little closer today, don't we? I say, not even bothering to roll my eyes. Prim left us cheese. I pulled it out. His expression brightens at the treat. Thank you, Prim. We'll have a real feast. Suddenly he falls into a capital accent as he mimics Effie Trinket, the maniacally upbeat woman who arrives once a year to read out the names at the reaping. I almost forgot. Happy Hunger Games. He plucks a few blackberries from the bush around us. And may the odds, he tosses the berry into a high arc towards me. I catch it in my mouth and break the delicate skin with my teeth. The sweetness explodes across my tongue. Be ever in your favor, I finish with equal verve. We have to joke about it because the alternative is to be scared out of our wits. Because the capital accent is so affected, almost anything sounds funny in it. I watch as Gail pulls out his knife and slices the bread. He could be my brother. Straight black hair, olive skin. We have the same gray eyes. But we're not related, at least not closely. Most of the families who work the mines resemble one another this way. That's why my mother and Prim, with their light hair and blue eyes, always look out of place. They are. My mother's parents were part of the small merchant class that caters to officials, peacekeepers, and the occasional seam customer. They ran an apothecary shop in the nicer part of District 12. Since almost no one can afford doctors, apothecaries are our healers. My father got to know my mother because on his hunts he would sometimes collect medicinal herbs and sell them to her shop to be brewed into remedies. She must have really loved him to leave her home for the seam. I try to remember that when all I can see is the woman who sat by, blank and unreachable, while her children turned to skin and bones. I try to forgive her for my father's sake, but to be honest, I'm not the forgiving type. Gail spreads the bread slices with the soft goat cheese, carefully placing a basil leaf on each while I strip the bushes of their berries. We settle back in a nook in the rocks. From this place we are invisible, but have a clear view of the valley, which is teeming with summer life, greens to gather, roots to dig, fish iridescent in the sunlight. The day is glorious with a blue sky and a soft breeze. The food's wonderful, with the cheese seeping into the warm bread and the berries bursting in our mouths. Everything would be perfect if this really was a holiday. If all the day off meant was roaming the mountains with Gail, hunting for tonight's supper. But instead we have to be standing in the square at 2 o'clock, waiting for the names to be called out. We could do it, you know, Gail says quietly. What? I ask. Leave the district, run off, live in the woods. You and I, we could make it, said Gail. I don't know how to respond. The idea is so preposterous. If we didn't have so many kids, he adds quickly. They're not our kids, of course, but they might as well be. Gail's 2 little brothers and a sister, Prim, and you may as well throw in our mothers too, because how would they live without us? Who would fill those mouths that are always asking for more? With both of us hunting daily, there are still nights when game has to be swapped for lard or shoelaces or wool, still nights when we go to bed with our stomachs growling. I never want to have kids, I say. I might, if I didn't live here, says Gail. But you do, I say, irritated. Forget it, he snaps. The conversation feels all wrong. Leave? How could I leave Prem, who is the only person in the world I'm certain I love? And Gale is devoted to his family. We can't leave, so why bother talking about it? And even if we did, where did this stuff about having kids come from? There's never been anything romantic between Gale and me. When we met, I was a skinny 12-year-old, and although he was only 2 years older, he already looked like a man. It took a long time for us even to become friends, to stop haggling over every trade and begin helping each other out. Besides, if he wants kids, Gale won't have any trouble finding a wife. He's good looking. He's strong enough to handle the work in the mines, and he can hunt. You can tell by the way the girls whisper about him when he walks by in school that they want him. It makes me jealous, but not for the reason people would think. Good hunting partners are hard to find. What do you want to do? I ask. We can hunt, fish, or gather. Let's fish at the lake. We can leave our poles and gather in the woods. Get something nice for tonight, he says. Tonight, after the reaping, everyone is supposed to celebrate, and a lot of people do, out of relief that their children have been spared for another year. But at least 2 families will pull their shutters, lock their doors, and try to figure out how they will survive the painful weeks to come. We make out well. The predators ignore us on a day when easier, tastier prey abounds. By late morning, we have a dozen fish, a bag of greens, and best of all, a gallon of strawberries. I found the patch a few years ago, but Gale had the idea to string mesh nets around it to keep out the animals. On the way home, we swing by the Hob, the black market that operates in an abandoned warehouse that once held coal. When they came up with a more efficient system that transported the coal directly from the mines to the trains, the Hob gradually took over the space. Most businesses are closed by this time on reaping day, but the black market's still fairly busy. We can easily trade 6 of the fish for good bread, the other 2 for salt. Greasy Say, the bony old woman who sells bowls of hot soup from a large kettle, takes half the greens off our hands in exchange for a couple of chunks of paraffin. We might do a tad better elsewhere, but we make an effort to keep on good terms with Greasy Say. She's the only one who can consistently be counted on to buy wild hog. We don't hunt them on purpose, but if you're attacked and you take out a dog or 2, well, meat is meat. Once it's in the soup, I'll call it beef. Greasy Say says with a wink, no one in the seam would turn up their nose at a good leg of wild hog, but the peacekeepers who come to the Hob can afford to be a little choosier. When we finish our business at the market, we go to the back door of the mayor's house to sell half the strawberries, knowing he has a particular fondness for them and can afford our price. The mayor's daughter, Madge, opens the door. She's in my year at school. Being the mayor's daughter, you'd expect her to be a snob, but she's all right. She just keeps to herself like me. Since neither of us really has a group of friends, we seem to end up together a lot at school, eating lunch, sitting next to each other, or at assemblies, partnering for sports activities. We rarely talk, which suits both of us just fine. Today, her drab school outfit has been replaced by an expensive white dress, and her blonde hair is done up with a pink ribbon. Reaping clothes. Pretty dress, says Gale. Maid shoots him a look, trying to see if it's a genuine compliment or if he's just being ironic. It is a pretty dress, but she would never be wearing it ordinarily. She presses her lips together and then smiles. Well, if I end up going to the capital, I want to look nice, don't I? Now it's Gale's turn to be confused. Does she mean it, or is she messing with him? I'm guessing the second. You won't be going to the capital, says Gale coolly. His eyes land on a small circular pen that adorns her dress. Real gold, beautifully crafted. It could keep a family in bread for months. What can you have? 5 entries? I had 6 when I was just 12 years old. That's not her fault, I say. No, it's no one's fault. Just the way it is, says Gail. Mage's face has become closed off. She puts the money for the berries in my hand. Good luck, Katniss. You too, I say, and the door closes. We walk towards the seam in silence. I don't like that Gale took a dig at Mage, but he's right, of course. The reaping system is unfair, with the poor getting the worst of it. You become eligible for the reaping the day you turn 12. That year, your name is entered once. At 13, twice, and so on until you reach the age of 18, the final year of eligibility, when your name goes into the pool 7 times. That's true for every citizen in all 12 districts in the entire country of Panem. But here's the catch. Say you were poor and starving as we were. You can opt to add your name more times in exchange for tesserae. Each tesserae is worth a meager year's supply of grain and oil for one person. You may do this for each of your family members as well. So at the age of 12, I had my name entered 4 times. Once because I had to, and 3 times for tesserae, for grain and oil for myself, Prim, and my mother. In fact, every year I have needed to do this, and the entries are cumulative. So now at the age of 16, my name will be in the reaping 20 times. Gail, who is 18, has been either helping or single-handedly feeding a family for 5 or 7 years. Of 5 for 7 years. He will have his name in 42 times. You can see why someone like Mage, who has never been at risk of needing a tessera, can set him off. The chance of her name being drawn is very slim compared to those of us who live in the seam. Not impossible, but slim. And even though the rules were set up by the capital, not the districts, certainly not Mage's family, it's hard not to resent those who don't have to sign up for a tessera. Gale knows his anger at Mage is misdirected. On other days, deep in the woods, I've listened to him rant about how the tessera are just another tool to cause misery in our districts, a way to plant hatred between the starving workers of the seam and those who can generally count on supper, and thereby ensure we will never trust one another. It's to the capital's advantage to have us divided among ourselves, he might say, if there were no ears to hear but mine. If it wasn't reaping day, if a girl with a gold pen and no tessera had not made what I'm sure she thought was a harmless comment. As we walk, I glance over at Gale's face, still smoldering underneath his stony expression. His rages seem pointless to me, although I never say so. It's not that I don't agree with him, I do. But what good is yelling about the capital in the middle of the woods? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make things fair. It doesn't fill our stomachs. In fact, it scares off the nearby game. I let him yell, though. Better he does it in the woods than in the district. Gale and I divide our spoils, leaving 2 fish, a couple of loaves of good bread, greens, and a quart of strawberries, salt, paraffin, and a bit of money for each. See you in the square, I say. Wear something pretty, he says flatly. At home, I find my mother and sister are ready to go. My mother wears a fine dress from her apothecary days. Prim is in my first reaping outfit, a skirt, a ruffled blouse. It's a bit big on her, but my mother has made it stay with pins. Even so, she's having trouble keeping the blouse tucked in at the back. A tub of warm water waits for me. I scrub off the dirt and sweat from the woods, and even wash my hair. To my surprise, my mother has laid out one of her own lovely dresses for me, a soft blue thing with matching shoes. Are you sure? I ask. I'm trying to get past rejecting offers of help from her. For a while I was so angry I wouldn't allow her to do anything for me. And this is something special. Her clothes from her past are very precious to her. Of course. Let's put your hair up too, she says. I let her towel dry it and braid it up on my head. I can hardly recognize myself in the cracked mirror that leans against the wall. You look beautiful, says Prim in a hushed voice, and nothing like myself. I say. I hug her because I know these next few hours will be terrible for her. Her first reaping. She's about as safe as you can get since she's only entered once. I wouldn't let her take out any tesserae. But she's worried about me, that the unthinkable might happen. I protect Prim in every way I can, but I'm powerless against the reaping. The anguish I always feel when she's in pain wells up in my chest and threatens to register on my face. I notice her blouse is pulled out of her skirt in the back again and force myself to stay calm. Tuck your tail in, little duck, I say, smoothing the blouse back in place. Prim giggles and gives me a small quack. Quack yourself, I say, with a light laugh, the kind only Prim can draw out of me. Come on, let's eat, I say, and plant a quick kiss on the top of her head. The fish and greens are already cooking in a stew, but that will be for supper. We decide to save the strawberries and bakery bread for this evening's meal, to make it special, we say. Instead, we drink milk from Prim's goat, Lady, and eat the rough bread made from the tessera grain, although no one has much appetite anyway. At 1 o'clock, we head for the square. Attendance is mandatory unless you're on death's door. This evening, officials will come around and check to see if this is the case. If not, you'll be imprisoned. It's too bad, really. They hold the reaping in the square, one of the few places in District 12 that can be pleasant. The square is surrounded by shops, and on public market days, especially if there's good weather, it has a holiday feel to it. But today, despite the bright banners hanging on the buildings, there's an air of grimness. The camera crews, perched like buzzards on rooftops, only add to the effect. People file in silently and sign in. The reaping is a good opportunity for the Capitol to keep tabs on the population as well. 12 through 18-year-olds are herded into the roped areas marked off by ages, the oldest in the front, the young ones like Prim toward the back. Family members line up around the perimeter, holding tightly to one another's hands. But there are others too, who have no money, who have no one they love at stake, or who no longer care, who slip among the crowd, taking bets on the 2 kids whose names will be drawn. Odds are given on their ages, whether they're seam or merchant, if they will break down and weep. Most refuse dealing with the racketeers, but carefully. These same people tend to be informers, and who hasn't broken the law? I could be shot on a daily basis for hunting, but the appetites of those in charge protect me. Not everyone can claim the same. Anyway, Gail and I agree that if we have to choose between dying of hunger and a bullet in the head, the bullet would be much quicker. The space gets tighter, more claustrophobic as people arrive. The square is quite large, but not enough to hold District 12's population of about 8,000. Latecomers are directed to the adjacent streets, where they can watch the event on screens as it's televised live by the state. I find myself standing in a clump of 16s from the seam. We all exchange terse nods, then focus our attention on the temporary stage that is set up before the Justice Building. It holds 3 chairs, a podium, and 2 large glass balls, one for the boys and one for the girls. I stare at the paper slips in the girls' ball. 20 of them have Katniss Everdeen written on them in careful handwriting. 2 of the 3 chairs fill with Mage's father, Mayor Undersea, who's a tall, balding man, and Effie Trinket, District 12's escort, fresh from the Capitol, with her scary white grin, pinkish hair, and spring green suit. They murmur to each other and then look with concern at the empty seat. Just as the town clock strikes 2, the mayor steps up to the podium and begins to read. It's the same story every year. He tells of the history of Panem, the country that rose up out of the ashes of a place that was once called North America. He lists the disasters, the droughts, the storms, the fires, the encroaching seas that swallowed up so much of the land, the brutal war of what little sustenance remained. The result was Panin, a shining capital ringed by 13 districts, which brought peace and prosperity to its citizens. Then came the dark days, the uprising of the districts against the capital. 12 were defeated, the 13th obliterated. The Treaty of Treason gave us the new laws to guarantee peace, and, as our yearly reminder that the dark days must never be repeated, it gave us the Hunger Games. The rules of the Hunger Games are simple. In punishment for the uprising, each of the 12 districts must provide one girl and one boy, called tributes to participate. The 24 tributes will be imprisoned in a vast outdoor arena that could hold anything from a burning desert to a frozen wasteland. Over a period of several weeks, the competitors must fight to the death. The last tribute standing wins. Taking the kids from our districts, forcing them to kill one another while we watch. This is the capital's way of reminding us how totally we are at their mercy. How little chance we would stand of surviving another rebellion. Whatever words they use, the real language is clear. Look how we take your children and sacrifice them, and there's nothing you can do. If you lift a finger, we will destroy every last one of you, just as we did in District 13. To make it humiliating as well as torturous, the capital requires us to treat the Hunger Games as a festivity, a sporting event, pitting every district against the others. The last tribute alive receives a life of ease back home, and their district will be showered with prizes, largely consisting of food. All year, the capital will show the winning district gifts of grain and oil, and even delicacies like sugar, while the rest of us battle starvation. It is both a time for repentance and a time for thanks, intones the mayor. Then he reads the list of past District 12 victors. In 72 years, we have had exactly 2. Only one is still alive. Hamish Abernathy, a paunchy, middle-aged man who at this moment appears hollering something unintelligible, staggers onto the stage and falls into the 3rd chair. He's drunk, very drunk. The crowd responds with its token applause, but he's confused and tries to give Effie Trinket a big hug, which she barely manages to fend off. The mayor looks distressed. Since all of this is being televised, right now District 12 is the laughingstock of Panem, and he knows it. He quickly tries to pull the attention back to the reaping by introducing Effie Trinket. Bright and bubbly as ever, Effie Trinket trots to the podium and gives her signature. Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Her pink hair must be a wig because her curls have shifted slightly off-center since her encounter with Hamish. She goes on a bit about what an honor it is to be here, although everyone knows she's just aching to get bumped up to a better district where they have proper victors, not drunks who molest you in front of the entire nation. Through the crowd, I spot Gale looking back at me with the ghost of a smile. As reapings go, this one at least has a slight entertainment factor, but suddenly I'm thinking of Gale and his 42 names in that big glass ball, and how the odds are not in his favor. Not compared to a lot of boys. And maybe he's thinking the same thing about me, because his face darkens and he turns away. But there are still thousands of slips. I wish I could whisper to him. It's time for the drawing. Effie Trinket says, as she always does, ladies first, and crosses to the glass ball with the girls' names. She reaches in, digs her hand deep into the ball, and pulls out a slip of paper. The crowd draws in a collective breath, and then you can hear a pin drop, and I'm feeling nauseous and so desperately hoping that it's not me, that it's not me, that it's not me. Effie Trinket crosses back to the podium, smooths the slip of paper, and reads out the name in a clear voice. And it's not me. It's Primrose Everdeen. One time, when I was in a bind in a tree, waiting motionless for game to wander by, I dozed off and I fell 10 feet to the ground, landing on my back. It was as if the impact had knocked every wisp of air from my lungs. And I lay there, struggling to inhale, to exhale, to do anything. That's how I feel now, trying to remember how to breathe, unable to speak, totally stunned as the name bounces around the inside of my skull. Someone is gripping my arm, a boy from the seam, and I think maybe I started to fall, and he caught me. There must have been some mistake. This can't be happening. Prim was one slip of paper in thousands. Her chances of being chosen so remote that I don't even bother to worry about her. Haven't I done everything? Taken the tesserae, refused to let her do the same? One slip in thousands. The odds had been entirely in her favor, but it hadn't mattered. Somewhere far away, I can hear the crowd murmuring unhappily, as they always do when a 12-year-old gets chosen, because no one thinks this is fair. And then I see her, the blood drained from her face, hands clenched in fists at her side, walking with stiff, small steps up towards the stage, passing me, and I see the black of her blouse has become untucked and hangs out over her skirt. It's this detail, the untucked blouse, forming a ducktail, that brings me back to myself. Prim! The strangled cry comes out of my throat, and my muscles begin to move again. Prim! I don't need to shove through the crowd. The other kids make way immediately, allowing me a straight path to the stage. I reach her just as she is about to mount the steps. With one sweep of my arm, I push her behind me. I volunteer, I gasp. I volunteer as tribute. There's some confusion on the stage. District 12 hasn't had a volunteer in decades, and the protocol has become rusty. The rule is that once a tribute's name has been pulled from the ball, another eligible boy, if a boy's name has been read, or girl, if a girl's name has been read, can step forward to take his or her place. In some districts, in which winning the reaping is such a great honor, people are eager to risk their lives. The volunteering is complicated, but in District 12, where the word tribute is pretty much synonymous with the word corpse, volunteers are all but extinct. Lovely, says Effie Trinket, but I believe there's a small manner of introducing the reaping winner and then asking for volunteers. And if one does come forth, then we, she trails off, unsure of herself. What does it matter, says the mayor. He's looking at me with a pained expression on his face. He doesn't know me really, but there's a faint recognition there. I'm the girl who brings the strawberries. The girl his daughter might have spoken of on occasion. The girl who 5 years ago huddled with her mother and sister as he presented her, the oldest child, with a Medal of Valor. A medal for her father, vaporized in the mines. Does he remember that? Does it matter? He repeats gruffly, let her come forward. Prim is screaming hysterically behind me. She's wrapped her skinny arms around me like a vice. No, Katniss, no, you can't go. Prim, let go, I say harshly, because this is upsetting me and I don't want to cry. When they televise the replay of the reaping tonight, everyone will make note of my tears, and I'll be marked as an easy target, a weakling. I will give no one that satisfaction. Let go! I can feel someone pulling her from my back. I turn and see Gale has lifted Prim off the ground, and she's thrashing in his arms. Up you go, Catnip, he says in a voice he's fighting to keep steady, and then he carries Prim off toward my mother. I steel myself and climb the stairs. Well, bravo, gushes Effie Trinket. That's the spirit of the games. She's pleased to finally have a district with a little action going on in it. What's your name? I swallow hard. Katniss Everdeen, I say. I bet my buttons that was your sister. Don't want her to steal all the glory, do we? Come on, everybody. Let's give a big round of applause to our newest tribute, trills Effie Trinket. To the everlasting credit of people, to the the people of District 12, not one person claps. Not even the ones holding betting slips, the ones who are usually beyond caring, possibly because they know me from the Hob, or they knew my father, or have even encountered Prim, who no one can help loving. So instead of acknowledging applause, I stand there unmoving while they take part in the boldest form of dissent they can manage, silence, which says, we do not agree, we do not condone, all of this is wrong. Then something unexpected happens. At least, I don't expect it because I don't think of District 12 as a place that cares about me. But a shift has occurred since I stepped up to take Prim's place, and now it seems I have become someone precious. At first one, then another, then almost every member of the crowd touches the 3 middle fingers of their left hand to their lips and holds it out to me. It is an old and rarely used gesture of our district, occasionally seen at funerals. It means thanks. It means admiration. It means goodbye to someone you love. Now I am truly in danger of crying, but fortunately, Haymitch chooses this time to come staggering across the stage to congratulate me. Look at her! Look at this one! He hollers, throwing an arm around my shoulders. He's surprisingly strong for such a wreck. I like her! His breath reeks of liquor, and it's been a long time since he's bathed. Lots of... he can't think of a word for a while. Spunk, he says triumphantly. More than you, he releases me and starts for the front of the stage. More than you, he shouts, pointing directly into a camera. Is he addressing the audience, or is he so drunk he might actually be taunting the Capitol? I'll never know, because just as he's opening his mouth to continue, Haymitch plummets off the stage and knocks himself unconscious. He's disgusting, but I'm grateful. With every camera gleefully trained on him, I have just enough time to release the small, choked sound in my throat and compose myself. I put my hands behind my back and stare into the distance. I can see the hills I climbed this morning with Gail. For a moment, I yearn for something, the idea of us leaving the district, making our way into the woods. But I know I was right about not running off, because who else would have volunteered for Prim? Haymitch is whisked away on a stretcher, and Effie Trinket is trying to get the ball rolling again. What an exciting day, she warbles as she attempts to straighten her wig, which has listed severely to the right. But more excitement to come. It's time to choose our boy tribute. Clearly, one hand on her head as she crosses to the ball that contains the boys' names and grabs the first slip she encounters. She zips back to the podium, and I don't even have time to wish for Gail's safety when she's reading the name. Peter Malark. Peter Malark. Oh no, I think, not him, because I recognize his name, although I have never spoken directly to him. Peter Malark. No, the odds are not in my favor today. I watch him as he makes his way towards the stage. Medium weight, stocky build, ashy blonde hair that falls in waves over his forehead. The shock of the moment is registering on his face. You can see his struggle to remain emotionless, but his blue eyes show alarm I've seen so often in Prey. Yet he climbs steadily onto the stage and takes his place. Effie Trinket asks for volunteers, but no one steps up. No one steps forward. He has 2 older brothers. I know, I've seen them in the bakery, but one is probably too old now to volunteer, and the other won't. This is standard. Family devotion only goes so far for most people on reaping day. What I did was the radical thing. The mayor begins to read the long, dull treaty of treason he does every year at this point. It's required, but I'm not listening to a word. Why him? I think. Then I try to convince myself it doesn't matter. Peter Malark and I are not friends, not even neighbors. We don't even speak. Our only real interaction happened years ago. He's probably forgotten it, but I haven't, and I know I never will. It was during the worst time. My father had been killed in the mine accident 3 months earlier, in the bitterest January anyone can remember. The numbness of his loss had passed, and the pain would hit me out of nowhere, doubling me over, racking my body with sobs. "Where are you?" I would cry out in my mind. "Where have you gone?" Of course, there was never any answer. The district had given us a small amount of money as compensation for his death, enough to cover 1 month of grieving, at which time my mother would be expected to get a job. Only she didn't. She didn't do anything but sit propped up in a chair, or more often, huddled under the blankets on her bed, eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Once in a while she'd stir, get up as if moved by some urgent purpose, only then to collapse back into stillness. No amount of pleading from Prim seemed to affect her. I was terrified. I suppose now that my mother was locked in some dark world of sadness, but at the time all I knew was that I had lost not only a father, but a mother as well. At 11 years old, with Prim just 7, I took over as head of the family. There was no choice. I bought our food at the market and cooked it as best as I could, and tried to keep Prim and myself looking presentable. Because if it had become known that my mother could no longer care for us, the district would have taken us away from her and placed us in the community home. I'd grown up seeing those home kids at school. The sadness, the marks of angry hands on their faces, the hopelessness that curled every shoulder forward. I could never let that happen to Prim, sweet, tiny Prim who cried when I cried, before she even knew the reason, who brushed and plaited my mother's hair before we left for school, who still polished my father's shaving mirror each night because he hated the layer of coal dust that settled on everything in the seam. The community home would crush her like a bug, not a hug. So I kept our predicament a secret. But the money ran out, and we were slowly starving to death. There's no other way to put it. I kept telling myself if I could only hold out until May, just May 8th, I would turn 12 and be able to sign up for the tesserae and get that precious grain and oil to feed us. Only there are still several weeks to go. We could well be dead by then. Starvation's not an uncommon fate in District 12. Who hasn't seen the victims? Older people who can't work, children from a family with too many to feed, those injured in the mines, struggling through the streets, and one day you come upon them sitting motionless against a wall or lying in the meadow. You hear the wails from a house, and the peacekeepers are called to retrieve the body. Starvation is never the cause of death officially. It's always the flu, or exposure, or pneumonia, but that fools no one. On the afternoon of my encounter with Peter Malark, the rain was falling in relentless icy sheets. I had been in town trying to trade some threadbare old baby clothes of Prim's in the public market, but there were no takers. Although I had been to the Hob on several occasions with my father, I was too frightened to venture into that rough, gritty place alone. The rain had soaked through my father's hunting jacket, leaving me chilled to the bone. For 3 days we had nothing but boiled water with some old dried mint leaves I'd found in the back of a cupboard. By the time the market closed, I was shaking so hard I dropped my bundle of baby clothes in a mud puddle. I didn't pick it up for fear I would keel over and be unable to regain my feet. Besides, no one wanted those clothes. I couldn't go home, because at home was my mother with her dead eyes, and my little sister with her hollow cheeks and cracked lips. I couldn't walk into that room with the smoky fire from the damp branches I had scavenged at the edge of the woods after the coal had run out. my hands empty of any hope. I found myself stumbling along a muddy lane behind the shops that serve the wealthiest townspeople. The merchants live above their businesses, so I was essentially in their backyards. I remember the outline of garden beds not yet planted for the spring, a goat or two in a pen, one sodden dog tied to a post, hunched defeated in the muck. All forms of stealing are forbidden in District 12, punishable by death. But it crossed my mind there might be something in the trash bins that was fair game. Perhaps a bone at the butcher's, or rotted vegetables at the grocer's. Something no one but my family was desperate enough to eat. Unfortunately, the bins had just been emptied. When I passed the baker's, the smell of fresh bread was so overwhelming I felt dizzy. The ovens were in back, and a golden glow spilled out the open kitchen door. I stood, mesmerized by the heat and the luscious scent, until the rain interfered, running its icing fingers down my back, forcing me back to life. I lifted the lid to the baker's trash bin and found it spotlessly, heartlessly bare. Suddenly a voice was screaming at me, and I looked up to see the baker's wife, telling me to move on, and did I want her to call the peacekeepers, and how sick she was of having those brats from the seam pawing through her trash. The words were ugly, and I had no defense. As I carefully replaced the lid and backed away, I noticed him, a boy with blonde hair peering out from behind his mother's back. I'd seen him at school. He was in my year, but I didn't know his name. He stuck with the town kids, so how would I know his name? His mother went back into the bakery, grumbling, but he must have been watching me as I made my way to the pen that held their pig and leaned against the far side of an old apple tree. The realization that I had had nothing to take home finally sunk in. My knees buckled and I slid down the tree trunk to its roots. It was too much. I was too sick and weak and tired. Oh, so tired. Let them call the peacekeepers and take us to the community home, I thought. Or better yet, let me die right here in the rain. There was a clatter in the bakery, and I heard the woman screaming again, and the sound of a blow, and I vaguely wondered what was going on. Feet sloshed toward me through the mud, and I thought, it's her. She's coming to drive me away with a stick. But it wasn't her. It was the boy. In his arms he carried 2 large loaves of bread that must have fallen into the fire because the crusts were scorched black. His mother was yelling, "Feed it to the pig, you stupid creature. Why not? No one decent will buy burned bread." He began to tear off chunks from the burned parts and toss them into the trough, and the front bakery bell rung, and the mother disappeared to help a customer. The boy never even glanced my way, but I was watching him, because of the bread, because of the red wheal that stood out on his cheekbone. What had she hit him with? My parents never hit us. I couldn't even imagine it. The boy took one look back at the bakery as if checking that the coast was clear. Then, his attention back on the pig, he threw a loaf of bread in my direction. The second quickly followed, and he sloshed back to the bakery, closing the kitchen door tightly behind him. I stared at the loaves in disbelief. They were fine. Perfect, really. Except for the burned areas. Did he mean for me to have them? He must have, because they were there at my feet. Before anyone could witness what had happened, I shoved the loaves up under my shirt, wrapped the hunting jacket tightly around me, and walked swiftly away. The heat of the bread burned into my skin, but I clutched it tighter, clinging to life. By the time I reached home, the loaves had cooled somewhat, but the insides were still warm. When I dropped them on the table, Prim's hands reached to tear off a chunk, but I made her sit, forced my mother to join us at the table, and poured warm tea. I scraped off the black stuff and sliced the bread. We ate an entire loaf, slice by slice. It was good, hearty bread. filled with raisins and nuts. I put my clothes to dry at the fire, crawled into bed, and fell into a dreamless sleep. It didn't occur to me until the next morning that the boy might have burned the bread on purpose, might have dropped the loaves into the flames, knowing it meant being punished, and then delivered them to me. But I dismissed this. It must have been an accident. Why would he have done it? He didn't even know me. Still, just throwing me the bread was an enormous kindness that would have surely resulted in a beating if discovered. I couldn't explain his actions. We ate slices of bread for breakfast and headed to school. It was as if spring had come overnight. Warm, sweet air, fluffy clouds. At school, I passed the boy in the hall. His cheek had swelled up and his eye had blackened. He was with his friends and didn't acknowledge me in any way. But as I collected Prim and started for home that afternoon, I found him staring at me from across the schoolyard. Our eyes met only for a second. Then he turned his head away. I dropped my gaze, embarrassed, and that's when I saw it. The first dandelion of the year. A bell went off in my head. I thought of the hours spent in the woods with my father, and I knew how we were going to survive. To this day, I can never take the connection between this boy, Peeta Mellark, and the bread that gave me hope, and the dandelion that reminded me that I was not doomed. And more than once, I have turned in the school highway and caught his eyes trained on me, only to quickly flit away. I feel like I owe him something, and I hate owing people. Maybe if I had thanked him at some point, I'd be feeling less conflicted now. I thought about it a couple of times, but the opportunity never seemed to present itself, and now it never will. Because we're going to be thrown into an arena to fight to the death. Exactly how I am supposed to work in a thank you in there. Somehow it just won't seem sincere if I'm trying to slit his throat. The mayor finishes the dreary treaty of treason and motions for Peeta and me to shake hands. His are as solid and as warm as those loaves of bread. Peeta looks me right in the eye and gives my hand what I think is meant to be a reassuring squeeze. Maybe it's just a nervous spasm. We turn back to face the crowd as the anthem of Panem plays. Oh well, I think. There will be 24 of us. Odds are someone else will kill him before I do. Of course, the odds have not been very dependable as of late. I'm going to leave off there, Huskies. It's been almost an hour. If you listened through the whole thing, thank you very much. That was actually only 2 chapters in 1 hour. I'll go ahead and place a reading every other day or so up in my YouTube page, or and also a direct link to the reading on the library Google Classroom. So again, if you want to read along, we're reading The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and today I read chapters 1 through 2 through page 33. So if you like this book and you're excited to keep reading ahead, you can go ahead and do that. You've already heard/read all the way through chapter 2, page 33. See you next time.